Hello, I'm Vivian McGrath, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the fantasy bond. When you're loving the person you hope they'll become, not the person they are right now. When I was in an abusive relationship, when I first met my partner, I was absolutely swept off my feet. I really thought, he's the one. This is the person I've been waiting for, because he was so charismatic and charming. And when you first meet types like that, they do love bomb you and they just sweep you off your feet. And you see this fantasy person, the one you've dreamed would always come along. I had, my knight in shining armor, the guy I was going to marry, and my life was going to be happy ever after. And so I fell in love with this fantasy of this person. But very soon after we met, there were signs that this wasn't who he really was. There was this darker person, this sort of little bit more nastier side to him started to come out. But then as soon as that person appeared and I questioned it, then he'd disappear and Mr. Charming came back, and it was all wonderful and roses and lovely all again. So I ignored the bad behavior, I minimized the warning signs I saw, and I clung to that fantasy person and just hoping that they would stay and be there forevermore. But then the cycle started to turn, the cycle of abuse, and the darker side started to appear more often, and the nice guy would disappear. And I became sort of addicted to chasing the high I felt when the nice guy came back. And so I was forever chasing it, searching for it. I started to change my behavior, thinking, well, if I can do this or that, then that person's going to come back again. And thinking that it was all down to me to make sure I did everything in my power to prove I was worthy of his love, so the nice person would come back and I'd never see that nasty side again. But then I realized one day that this was just a fantasy. This was actually somebody I'd projected onto him and believed he was. It wasn't the real him. He was actually showing me who he was. I was just ignoring all the warning signs because the person that I believed he was in my head, and I projected that onto him, and that was what I wanted and waited and hoped for him to change. And when I left that abusive relationship, I had to grieve the loss of that fantasy person. I had to grieve the loss of the dream life I thought I was going to have with him. And that was really, really painful. And in a way, I had to grieve the loss of my innocence when I realized that I'd been living this lie, waiting for this fantasy relationship that was never going to come, and wasting all those years and going through all that pain, trying to save him from himself, to turn him into the dream person that I believed I could make him become. And it's a fantasy. It's a dysfunctional relationship, and it is a really unhealthy one. Because what it is, in fact, is two people who are very insecure, both as insecure as each other, and both fear abandonment and fear vulnerability. And so, in a sense, a fantasy relationship, one that you are striving for and hoping and waiting will come one day in the future, is safer than a real one, where you actually have to expose yourself to being vulnerable in order to get close, in order to have true intimacy and a relationship that lasts. That can be terrifying for somebody with deep-seated insecurities and fears of abandonment, because what if they see me for who I really am and run away? That scares you. So a virtual relationship, a fantasy relationship, in a weird, dysfunctional way, feels safer to you. But it's not ever going to last. It doesn't exist. That fantasy is in your head, and you have projected it onto them, and you've projected it onto the relationship. And when I realized that, it was like a veil came off. And I saw it for what it really was, an unhealthy, dysfunctional relationship. And I realized I couldn't help him. I couldn't change him. Nothing I did was ever going to bring about that fantasy guy I had in my head. I had to let that go, and I had to grieve it. And it was far better for me to turn that energy and work on loving myself instead, so that I could love myself as much as I want others to love me. And only when I could do that would I find somebody who would love me as much as that and look after me, care for me, protect me. And only when I love myself enough would vulnerability no longer scare me. And the other thing I realized was when I asked myself the question, what if he never changes to become that fantasy man I'm waiting and hoping for that I have in my head? Is this good enough for me as it is right now? A relationship that's dysfunctional, that doesn't fulfill my needs, and probably never will. And I realized the answer was no. It wasn't good enough for me. And I should stop waiting and hoping for this fantasy relationship, this fantasy dream man that was going to make me happy one day in the future. And I should start to just focus on me and finding self-love and happiness within. So I hope that's explained the fantasy bond and why sometimes in dysfunctional relationships, we just have this fictional fantasy relationship that weirdly feels safer than a real one. But it's not healthy. It is dysfunctional. And loving that person who you think they will become one day in the future is not a path to happiness or long-term healthy love. So pour that love into you instead, because that's the only way you'll work towards having a real relationship and true love. And I've done another video on that, which I'll also put in the links below. So I hope that's helped. And if you like this video, please click the like button, share or subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video.